Hey, Mark, how you doing today?
Good, Joe. How are you?
I'm good. I understand you had a good conversation with Scott from Catching Clouds.
That's right. Scott and I have known each other for a couple of years professionally. He ended up emailing me a couple of years ago after I did a webinar. I don't even remember what the webinar was on, but we did a webinar and he reached out and said, hey, I'd love to grab just 15, 20 minutes of your time. Now, I get a lot of those requests and I'm usually pretty stingy about them. And I remember him saying, there's this big issue that all these Amazon sellers need to be aware of, and that's this issue of tax nexus. And I was like, what in the world is that? I have no idea what tax nexus is. And he started telling me about it, and I didn't think too much of it at the time. I kind of thought that he was just trying to pitch his service. Ends up, Scott was at the forefront of the whole tax nexus issue. This is obviously a huge issue today, something that he's still leading the charge on to try and educate the industry and try and help sellers out who may owe back taxes in various locations, various states. And beyond that, Scott is just a very, very intelligent guy. As he says in the interview at one point, whatever he does, whenever he does something, he loves to just delve into it. So he becomes an expert in it pretty quickly. He's definitely done that in the world of e-commerce, accounting, and all of the issues surrounding the world of online business. Now, what we talked about specifically is something that I don't think, Joe, you and I have addressed too much, but let me ask you and put you on the spot. If you were advising a client who had just sold their business and they ask, okay, what do I have to do now that I sold my business? What do I do with my business entity? What do I do with everything that I had before? What would you tell them?
Well, I guess I'd tell them what I did, which was I changed the entity name. I kept the shell there for the next venture that I had. And I think I got that information from my CPA. Is that what he's talking about?
Yep, absolutely. So what he's talking about is the shutdown of a business. So even if you're going to keep the entity, and this really applies for Amazon sellers as well. Let's say that you're an Amazon seller, you have resale certificates in multiple states. You have to shut down the entity or shut down those tax liabilities in all of those states. You have to actually go through this process, and it's not as simple as just logging online and saying, hey, shut this down, we're no longer doing business. It's actually quite a bit of a process. And he put together this really detailed spreadsheet. And for those of you that are listening to this on the podcast portion, I'd encourage you at some point, go over to the YouTube version, take a look at it, because we share our screen, we go through this checklist, and we are making it available for download as well, where we go through all the steps that you have to really consider before a sale, during a sale, and after the sale as well. And I was kind of blown away by some of the stuff after the sale. He was telling me just a couple of things about how when they were shutting down a business, they had to reach out to the state of California multiple times to say, this business is shut down. Please confirm that this business is shut down. And the state kept coming back and saying, oh, by the way, you owe taxes. Says, no, we shut this down. And so this whole idea of what do you do after the sale and the documentation that you need to have in place after the sale is something we don't address a lot.
Okay, you're just touching on something. I keep getting an email and a notification from the state of North Carolina that I owe them like $65 or something in taxes due for this business that I have in fact closed down, and I keep trying to notify them of that. So this checklist sounds great. It sounds like something we should do in our exit planning process and share that with them.
Absolutely. So this is going to be made available for download. We're going to build up the resources over time. So right now it's just going to be the checklist. I plan to put together an infographic and some other materials for people. But this is serious stuff. I mean, if you don't handle the close down of your business properly, you can do things like trigger an audit. You can end up owing taxes on a zero revenue business because there's minimum filing requirements in some states. So this stuff is important and it's tedious. It's not fun, but it's necessary to start thinking about these things. And hopefully this checklist in this episode will really help people plan. And it doesn't take much. You just have to plan a little bit before you go into the sale to make sure that you get it all in place.
In my experience, some of the things that are the least fun bring you the most value when it comes time to selling your business. So why don't we just jump right into it, okay?
Absolutely. Scott, thanks so much for joining me.
Good morning.
Well, so for those of you watching or listening, I've known Scott for, I think now 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
We talked over email initially, and I still remember the first email I got from you. You were the first person to ever bring up the Amazon tax issues, and you were proving to be at the forefront of that. So you're definitely recognized as somebody who is out there leading the way for e-commerce and e-commerce accounting and tax issues. Why don't you just let the people listening or watching this know a little bit about you? What's your background, and what are you currently doing?
Cool. No, thank you. So, yeah, my background, I've been a long time IT geek. And about 8 years ago, my wife, who's a CPA and a power user, said, "Hey, if I started this business where we did outsourced cloud accounting, where businesses need both accounting and technology, would you want to do it?" And I said, "Sure." And so we really looked, and she sold her tax practice so we could focus on providing accounting. And I got on my big corporate global multinational job. But anything I've been involved in, I've become an expert in. Okay, I really geek out on understanding the e-commerce business owners and what are they thinking, what are their challenges. And not being an accountant, I had so much to learn, but none of it's all kind of organized in a way that a non-accountant can really understand it. So I've really focused on those things, and then geeking out on the technology, on the cloud inventory tools. I got into sales tax, and I'm really an expert on sales tax management and consult to those things. But really our goal and our mission is really just to make e-commerce businesses and business owners better, and to really get them information that's useful. That's just always been our focus. And of course, Catching Clouds, we provide outsourced cloud accounting. We have our 14 accountants and my 4 tech staff that do that as an outsourced accounting department. But both Patty and I spend a ton of time really kind of focusing on helping sellers in the bigger picture and the new issues that are impacting them.
Yeah, absolutely. And people that know Quiet Light Brokerage know that we talk all the time about having clean books, clean financials, and how important it is. And we get the fact that it's kind of a pain to do. And services like yours can really help out for somebody who doesn't want to do that on their own, or keep track of that on their own. And
throw a plug in. We just launched our Catching Clouds Academy, which is our online training courses, because we can only help so many sellers that are ready to outsource or at the right size. So we're taking 80% of all of our intellectual property and lessons and turning them into really useful, of course, paid for online training. So we've released our Shopify accounting one that's live on our site. We'll be launching Amazon in a few weeks, and really it covers sales tax, configuration, and really how to get to accurate financials. And it's both for their accountants as well as sellers that are doing it themselves. And so we're always trying to kind of support that broader audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that education piece is really, really important. I've run into people that are doing millions upon millions of dollars in revenue, but they really have no idea what their numbers mean. And it's one of the most important pieces of data for any business. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. What we're going to talk about today, I think, is an interesting topic, because I often write and talk about how to prepare a business for sale. What do you have to do to get ready for that sale? How do you position it in the right way? And you and I talked probably about 6-8 months ago about the other end of the process after the sale. How do you properly shut that business down? And what are some of the gotchas that can happen in that shutdown process? And you shared with me a checklist spreadsheet. And we're going to show this on the screen for those that are watching this on YouTube. And we'll provide some resources for people to be able to download similar checklists here as well. But you shared a checklist with me of things that people should be doing after they sell their business, and go through that checkdown list. And so we're going to walk through that here today together and talk about some of these issues here. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, and my screen should be up now.
I can see your screen.
You can see it?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so why don't you go ahead and take the lead on this here. We'll start up here. Right at the very first section here. And the way you have this set up is you have different columns. You have whether or not it's a decision that somebody has to make, or an action, what the task is, who's responsible for it, when it should be done, and any notes or resources that we have to help out with this. So let's just step through this one by one and comment on each of these. So the very first one, it's a decision. Engage a CPA or expert to support closing down the business. So any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, you really want to have a CPA look. You want to make sure you understand your financial position and how getting a big chunk of money is going to impact you from a tax perspective. Okay, and you want to make sure you understand the type of business you are, what it's going to mean, how that accountant is going to help shut down and do the final tax return for that business. You want that expert all set up. You want to make sure you know exactly everything they need. And we cover a lot of those things in this checklist, but you want to know ahead of time. You want to know the impact to your sales or to your personal taxes, and you want to make sure you're following any rules for closing down your business. And that's the person that's going to help you quite a bit, but really understanding the tax impacts of getting a whole big chunk of money is pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I've done deals before where we're under offer,
Mhm.
and my seller will then contact their accountant and realize this offer doesn't actually work for me because of the tax implications.
Yeah.
And that's a bad spot to be in. Obviously, you waste a lot of time, and it's frustrating for everybody involved.
Yeah, well, there's a big thing depending on, I mean, there's that balance that if you're ready to sell, what reasons are you selling for? And have you looked how it impacts you financially? Is this something you want to keep doing? What is the next thing you're going to do? But you really want to have all the information to make the best decision possible for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding the tax implications can also understand the type of deal that you need to do, because how a deal is allocated, how a buyer actually acquires a business, it makes a difference in the final tax picture. And you can set those expectations up front to put yourself in the best position possible when you do receive offers.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. So the second decision here is whether or not you're going to keep the current business entity open or close it down. And for those that don't know, most deals that are done, the vast majority of deals that are done are asset sales. So in
Mhm.
other words, the buyer is setting up a new company and they simply absorb all of the virtual assets that you have, customer list, website, and the physical inventory as well. If you have physical
Yep,
inventory, that's going to flow over into their new business's ownership, which leaves you, the seller, with an entity still, a
correct.
corporation. And so the question here is, what are you going to do with that entity?
Yeah, and if it's a generic name and you're a serial entrepreneur and the company name is based off of, your kids' names or something else that doesn't apply to that business, if it's the same name as the website you just sold, it's going to be a little tricky. But if you're going to start another business, okay, and do something else, whether it's another online business or something else, it's going to be easier in a lot of cases to keep that EIN, the federal EIN open, keep track, keep all these other pieces in place, the business bank accounts. You don't have to shut all that down and restart over. And you can quiet things down to the point where you close out other pieces of the business like sales tax license and other things you don't need for that business. But you can save yourself that. Now, if you're planning on doing something completely different or retiring or everything else, just make sure you know which path you're going down, because you don't want to just ignore that you have this business entity that can have tax filing requirements or late fees or other things that could impact you. So decide which way you're going. If you're going to shut it down, go through that checklist. If you're going to keep it, make sure you've adjusted or quieted it down or changed it as needed for whatever the next thing you're going to do is.
Well, and that moves into our next step here, and that's the sales tax licenses.
Yep.
Obviously, this is going to apply to e-commerce businesses only,
Mhm.
especially when you're selling in different states. And this is much more in your wheelhouse. So why don't you go ahead and describe this one?
Yeah. So if you've now sold off specifically your Amazon FBA business, okay, and you've sold off all of your inventory and your physical property that created sales tax nexus in 23 states, and you only have nexus where you are in your one state, you need to actively go out and close down all those sales tax licenses because one, if you don't do it right away, you have to, pay $50 for not filing a return, even if it's a $0 return. One, you need to make sure you file all your final returns that you filed. Like once you've closed it off, you need to do those last returns. You want to contact the states, and then you need to ask and be really, really diligent if you're closing down in a state, especially states like California, where you have to set a reminder every few weeks, not even every month, to go double check that they've closed it. We had our employee in California, and then they left a couple years ago. It took almost 18 months for us as accountants and detail-oriented and checklist people of going back and forth with California until we had finally shut everything down, and they stopped sending notices and extra fees that didn't apply and everything else. But you want to actively go out there and say, hey, here's the last return. Here's all the money. How do I make this the last return? How do I close it? What do I send you? Registered mail. And you really want to go through that and make sure. But if you put it off by a month or two and you didn't file those monthly returns, even if it was $0, there's no money flowing through, you're going to pay $50 usually for filing that $0 return late. And it could trigger an audit in which they would look at not only you shutting down your business, but all the past. And of course, anytime you're audited, their goal is to find something wrong. And they might find hundreds of dollars that are wrong, but they might find thousands of dollars that are wrong. So you want to follow all the rules. This is probably the biggest gotcha for somebody selling an FBA business, because you can't sell and hand off those sales tax licenses. That's the other business's responsibility.
Yeah, and that audit worry. I've had a couple sellers who have been audited after the sale. It's a big concern. You don't want to fall in that area. I think something that happens with online entrepreneurs is we get so used to doing things online, quick and easy. You close an account, you just go online, say close my account.
Yeah,
it's a huge inconvenience if we have to actually email somebody to close an account. But when dealing with a state government, it's a different ballgame, right? I mean, you're talking registered mail, you're talking finding a fax machine, digging it up and dusting it off and using something like that, right?
It is. And to let you know, we have a bunch of partners, SALT, Sales and Local Tax Partners, that will help you do nexus studies and support you in audit and do a voluntary disclosure agreement and help you get registered in states. None of them, including us, have a shutdown service because it's usually $100 to get registered in a state. If I actually charged it, I'd probably charge $200 or $300 per state to close it down for somebody because it can last so long. This would be a great use for a virtual assistant, and just pay them hourly to chase it and go down on it, and then make sure you double check and review everything, sign every document and everything else, because this is something that could pop up for weeks, months, quarters, possibly years, where you just have to keep telling that state, no, I closed my business. Here's the proof from before. And it's just one of those things. But you're right. It's just not as automatic as logging online and say, close the account. You really do have to follow up pretty consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. So, because we have a lot to get through, I'm going to move on. Although I mean that point is so important, and one that frankly we haven't done a lot of advising on. So I would advise people that are thinking about selling an Amazon FBA business, research this, and you can always reach out to Scott, I'm sure, and get some detailed information on this. Right. The next step that you have here is something that we advise people all the time, and that's before you're selling, about a year before or more, if possible. Frankly, you should probably be doing this from the very beginning of the business, but I'm guilty of this as well. Collecting all of the business documents. And that would be, from my perspective, we would say collect bank statements, merchant account statements, contracts at a very minimum, and tax returns, of course. Is there anything else that you would add in that besides that list?
Well, of course, anything payroll related, okay? All of your business formation documents, your EIN and anything else related to the business. But the big one that we run into that you need the data to support things are all of your vendor invoices, okay? All the vendor invoices, where you've spent your money, and all of your receipts. And you need all of those things, not just to sell your business, but you need those both to manage your business effectively, be able to review information, but it would also protect you in an audit. Okay, whether it's a sales tax audit or an income tax audit. So the idea is, and what we try to do is try to do all those things in real time. As you get them, have them automatically email and save them. And I'll put a plug in for one of our favorite tools, and that's a tool called HubDoc, HUBDOC. What you do is you put in all of your logins for your bank statements, your credit cards, your insurance, and a bunch of other pieces, logins, and they'll log in and download all those PDFs, and then they'll check every day and pull them all in. That's how we collect bank statements for dozens and dozens of clients who have dozens of credit cards, and they're all automatically pushed into our inbox. So it's a great day-to-day tool, but it'll help you pull all that information in, and then you can use it, both their mobile app and other email, to push documents into it. So it can help kind of be a honeypot to pull all those things together. But really, you need a copy of every document, every receipt. Even if you don't have it attached in your accounting or wherever else, you just want to have one place that has all of that data, and then try to be as organized as possible. It'll help your CPA do your taxes at the end of the year. It'll help you look up information, and it'll help you during a sale.
Now, something we've run into a lot would be people keeping track of their vendor purchases with their credit cards. I would assume that that would be less than what you would recommend.
Correct. It won't help you in an audit. The IRS will disallow it. It doesn't give you the details on what you paid. You know, what's the quantity? What was the description? What did you pay per unit? It won't show if you break out any inbound shipping, customs, or prepayment discounts. All those details that are really critical to get to accurate financials are pretty critical. And if you haven't been keeping track of everything in a Google Sheet or a cloud inventory tool for tracking all of your purchases, you need to go back to those PDFs. And if you have a dispute with a seller, and you always want to look too to make sure they're not your distributor or vendor, even if you've provided a tax exemption certificate, that you can pull that invoice, and if they charge you sales tax, you can catch it and make sure they don't. So there's so many reasons for keeping track of all of that information, but it'll also help you in a sale. We're reviewing a business now, and it's taking weeks to track down purchase orders and going back to vendors they're still working with to get copies of everything, so they have a complete picture of what happened in the business.
Yeah, and that document collection, when you actually sell a business, I've never run into anybody who's been through the sales process who said that was easier than I thought. It's almost always going to be harder than you think to be able to collect all the documents, which is why we recommend do it early, a year before at least. Really, you should start now, even if you're thinking of selling in 5, 6, 7 years. Yep. Start now. It's one of those habits that every time we encourage people to do it, they kind of grumble like they just got a big homework assignment, and then they come back and they say, that was actually really useful, and I gained some insight. So something, again, pointing my finger at myself here as well, because we don't do it as well as we should. It's hard, it's tedious, but it's really, really useful. The next item on the list is also a year before, and something that you should be tracking, and that's building a complete asset list of everything that you have, your inventory, domains, intellectual property, fixed assets that you have. Now, let me ask you, might be kind of a silly question, but assuming somebody's keeping their books correctly and accurately, this would show up in various places within their books, right? I mean, as far as all the assets that they have should be on a balance sheet somewhere.
Correct. And it can, if you're doing it right, it can. But some of those things like domains, you know, you may not have the details for them. Hey, if they've been renewed for 5 years, 10 years, you know, whatever else, that having just one Excel sheet or Google sheet that has a tab for each of these things. Now, dynamically, you should be keeping track of your inventory using a cloud inventory tool. Yes, you should record these things, should show up on your balance sheet in your books, but where's the supporting information for them? You know, where's the receipt for that $30,000 forklift? You know, where is the, hey, we really did pay $20,000 in shelvings for our warehouse? It's a combination of those things that you kind of have to prove it. So just because it's on a credit card statement to say, here's where I spent the $10,000, you need the supporting information to say, hey, this really was what it says it was, and that's what that, you know, payment was for. You know, it's one of those things you could review quarterly and say, hey, do I have it? Oh, I bought 5 new domains. I did this, that, or the other thing, because in all the volume of transactions for a dynamic e-commerce business, a lot of these things start to disappear into the books. They might be there and you can look them up, but it's not the same as actually tracking them. It's the same thing. There are some apps to do it. Like there are some really good home inventory tools that'll let you walk around and take pictures of all of your stuff. The other thing you can do is take pictures of things that you have and the things that are worth money in your business. And I get that inventory turns over and you'll just count it before a sale, but it just helps to be organized and track these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's move on to the e-commerce specific tasks here.
Yep.
And we're moving up much closer to the sale here. We're talking about a month before approximately. And one of the recommendations that you have right off the bat is to back up all of your data. What data would you recommend backing up and why?
Okay. So keep in mind that you as the owner, even in an equity sale, you can be liable for a sales tax audit, you know, years, you know, sometimes up to 10 years in future. You want to make sure you've backed up your financials, your tax returns, all the sales tax filings, all those PDFs of what you paid in. how, where's those spreadsheets you use to calculate your cost of goods sold to show your profitability on your tax returns. Okay. Everything that you just collected before, you want to back up and you want to save it on, if everybody remembers zip drives, you want to save it onto a DVD. You want to save it up into a cloud storage. You want to pick, save it to a Blu-ray DVD because, in 5 years, those will be passé. You want to make sure you've saved everything that you've gathered. You want to save and make sure you have a copy in a safe, both online in the cloud and physically and wherever your safety deposit box or wherever else. Because if you get caught in the future, most states will just take a guess and say, oh, you did $5 million in business that year based on your tax return. You owe our state $100,000, okay? Some random number. And with this data, you can pull it up and say, no, we owe you 50, okay? I mean, the time you put into this, because the states will just look and make an estimate or a guess. You need the supporting information, the documents and everything else to be able to protect yourself in an audit. So you want to have all those things. Plus, keep in mind, quite a few of these things are the exact same things you need to hand over to the new owner to do a good job of handing that off. And it's all the same things, but it's really important to make sure you have multiple copies of this data in case anything comes up, whether it's legal, but an audit or something else.
Yeah, and if anyone thinks that this stuff doesn't happen, I can tell a personal story real quick here. I had a business that I did sell. I kept the entity open, and it was just a zero revenue entity. I didn't file my tax return one year, and that set off a trigger. The IRS ended up sending me notices and paying me a personal visit, claiming that I owed over $50,000 in taxes. Now I didn't, and we got it worked out. But that was all because of just being disorganized. Thankfully, I did have enough organized, and it's pretty easy to show that I didn't make any money. And we were able to get it cleared up. These things do happen. They do happen.
And I'm all for dealing with Murphy and the universe and everything else, and just be prepared and be proactive. And then if it doesn't happen, you put a little time into it. But if it does, it'll save you so much time and pain and cost and everything else.
Absolutely. I love this next tip. It's one that we've recommended in the past to people. That's record all of your sites, all the sites that you use, passwords and logins. And one of the recommendations here is to use one of these password reminder services like LastPass or OnePass, any of these. We've had sellers in the past who, in order to transition over their business, they put everything into one LastPass account, and they just hand over that LastPass account. Makes it super easy to transition the business.
Well, correct. And it's the one thing that I tell everybody. I've got a new cleaner security best practices that I'll send over to you, Mark, that we just prettied up. But it's the one thing as 21st century citizens we should all be doing. The thing that you can protect yourself the most as an individual or a business online is to do effective password management. It's having unique passwords everywhere, but knowing where all those passwords are, and then using two-factor authentication on banks and your Amazon account. Any of these critical things, and having a unique password everywhere. So it's a combination of that, but it's really being organized. I really only probably know 5 or 10 passwords, and I have access to thousands. Okay. And you can use LastPass to share passwords with virtual assistants, with partners, with whoever else. It is just the number one tip that when I talk about in conferences and whatever else, but it's critical when it comes to handing these things off to another owner. And then they'll have a list when we do it. As accountants, we'll get access to between 50 and 100 logins per client. And then we make a whole checklist of all the passwords that they need to close down, sub-logons to banks and everything else, and all the passwords they need to go in and change the passwords because they had been sharing them with somebody else. So it is just so critical for anybody. And it'll make your life easier on a day-to-day basis just by using one.
Yeah, and I know I signed up for LastPass probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I've gone in there once in a while, and it's almost shocking to see how many accounts that you accumulate over that period of time. And for someone that's not thinking about this and using the same password on all their sites, or maybe rotating 4 or 5 passwords, it only takes one of those sites to be compromised. And then somebody can get access to all the other places that you have passwords that you're using the same passwords for. It's very easy for people to break in that way. I'm the same way as you. I only know a handful of passwords to a few places. Everything else is completely random. It gets changed every now and then, and that's intentional because it's just too dangerous otherwise. The two-factor authentication is a great idea. You do make a note in here, and it's important, I think, to disable that two-factor authentication before you get a new phone. And probably be a good idea to just disable that before you transfer the account over, right? In order for that,
you would need to do that too. So correct. If you set it up and all of the passwords where you either get an email or a text to your cell phone number, okay, or to Google Authenticator or LastPass Authenticator, these add-on apps on your phone, you want to disable all of those, and you really have to before you can hand them over to somebody else to run. As long as your phone doesn't die, but the first time you have 10 or 20, like I do, things on two-factor authentication and your phone dies, it's extra work, probably 5 times as much work to go in and reset those passwords and get all the information to get access to everything again, and then turn that all back on again. So you definitely you need to disable it before you hand over an actual login. And then if you remember, you want to go disable that the day before, an hour before you go into the 6-hour John at Best Buy to get new phones, and then remember to turn it back on again.
Right. Okay. I'm going to lump the next 3 items together, partially out of time because we're starting to run up against the clock here. And also I think they go well together. Yeah. And that is to document your standard operating procedures. And if you don't have documented, or if you don't have standard operating procedures, start to document what you do, because you probably do. You just haven't documented them yet. Create a list of all of your action and support tools, and then also the list of team members and roles and responsibilities, or a general organization chart. Now, I've in 10 years of doing this at Quiet Light Brokerage, I've seen one person do this.
Yeah, I know.
But I'll tell you what, that made things so much easier. And I will contend that she got more for her business because of it, because she actually did all this. In fact, I've used her in a number of conference presentations that I've given as far as just how much value you can add. I'm going to add one more plug here to this and say, if you do this, if you start to document your standard operating procedures, if you start to document your organization chart, what you're going to find are inefficiencies and places that you can become more efficient. You can also find areas where maybe you're doing something on a daily basis and it's kind of that grind. Those are the things that you outsource and make your day a little bit easier. Now, the one thing I would disagree with you here, Scott, is you say do this about 4 weeks before. I guess say 4+ weeks.
Yeah.
I would say do it now if you can.
Correct. Well, a lot of these you can do now. You should be doing almost all of these things that we have here. You should be doing now and running your business on a regular basis to be efficient. And I completely agree. I spend a lot of my time consulting doing e-commerce business process optimization. And it starts with, hey, what is your process for generating a manual B2B order? And somebody gives me a 15-step process. We go, why don't we get that down to 2 steps? And when you write things down, it clears it up. And I completely agree about the outsourcing, whether it's to a virtual assistant or you've read the book Virtual Freedom. You really want to document those things and definitely highlight them. And the ones you don't like to do, well, that's the point of having a business. You can hire someone else to do it, whether it's a teen, one of your own teens, or a spouse, or a virtual assistant, or an actual employee, or outsource to a company if it's something you don't want to do, like accounting or fulfillment or a number of other things. That's where you can really identify those things. And you could, if you do it early enough, you could improve the efficiencies and the overall profitability of the business, which really will impact that multiplying factor when you sell it.
Yeah, and for anyone that thinks that this might be a daunting task to even do, what I would recommend, and something that I do with my businesses, is just start with a notebook and pen and just start to write these things down that way. You don't have to have the fancy graph to start. Now, I would take that extra step after you do the notebook and pen and document it in a nice, fancy way, or hire somebody to do it for you, because there's something nice visually about that. But just start, writing down who are the people in your organization and what do they do, and then maybe take that the next step and say, okay, well, how does this actually look if I were to organize this in a certain way, and what sort of areas are they working in? if you do this again, you're going to find fat in some places. You're going to find too little meat in other places of your business. It's a really good way to optimize business. And from, like you said, from a selling standpoint, it adds value. It's most certainly adds value to your business.
I completely agree. It really is. It'll help you understand things and clear it up. We do this internally on our business on a regular basis, but my wife and partner and I are total process geeks. And we'd be amazed, even with us doing this over and over, we find great efficiencies, every quarter. And it can just make your business that much easier to run.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's move on to the sales tax area. And again, this is going to be something that you're an absolute expert on. And this assumes that you're closing down the entity, or at least closing down the sales tax in the states
Correct.
where you have sales tax. So why don't you walk us through some of the steps here? The first one being collect the data to file final returns.
Yeah. So one of the things you want to be careful about doing is, let's say you sell the business mid-month, mid-whatever, okay, whatever that day is, you need to make sure you've downloaded the last chunk of orders. So don't hand off the logins too fast. Make sure you get that last batch of data for that fractional month or the last month you're responsible for from a filing sales tax capability. But you would download, however you're doing sales tax, whether it's TaxJar, Taxify, or Avalara, you still want to download all that data and make sure you have a copy of all of it, okay? Excuse me. And so what you're going to want to do is go through and then you contact the state and say, hey, I'm going to file my last return. Okay, even before the due date. Don't wait. If it's an annual return, you don't want to wait. You want to contact them and say, hey, I sold my business last week or yesterday. I want to close down how do I do that? And they'll say, oh, you file the return and you fill out these 3 forms, and whatever they say, do it. But don't wait and assume I've got to wait until the end of the quarter or the end of the month or whatever else. You can do everything right then and there and wrap it all up. Okay.
Yeah, and some states, by the way, have very specific things that you have to do before you're technically allowed to sell that business. New Jersey and California, I know, and I'm sure there's other states as well, require public notifications where you need to publish something in a classified ad saying this is for sale. If anyone has claims against this business, this is the time to make them. Yeah. And so these are things that you'll learn by contacting the states, I would assume.
Correct. Well, and when you pull that last data, make sure you're really careful to know, hey, it's the, it's the 13th. Well, it's October 13th. It's Friday the 13th. But if your last sale is midnight today, make sure you go in and download that data and purge it, and you void or make all those future ones tax exempt. Okay. Be careful not to include a bunch of an extra few days or weeks of sales that the other company's collecting and responsible for sales tax. If you include that data, they'll have you pay it, but that money didn't come into your account. So you want to be careful on the timing. You want to contact the states and figure out what hoops you have to jump through, okay? And then you want to make sure you save a copy of everything you communicate through. One warning is when you call the IRS about issues and changes in closing down a business or tax issues, you can ask them for their badge number or whatever else. And if they give you bad advice, you can go back to the IRS and they'll say, oh yeah, we see that that's logged, and they won't really hold you accountable. You still might owe whatever tax, but you didn't do anything wrong. That doesn't apply to the departments of Bureau of Revenue or Department of Revenue or BOE or all these other sites. So if you call and you get somebody that sounds like they're 12 and they don't sound like they know what they're doing, call back later, call back in an afternoon, call on a different day, look online and verify things, and then make sure you double check. So that's one of the key things, is you might talk to somebody that has no idea what they're doing. And even if you write down their name, it doesn't protect you as a business. So you want to make sure you've called in multiple times to make sure you've correlated that you're doing the right things, that they received the information you sent. And unfortunately, you're going to have to be patient. Because some of these states are so bureaucratic and they move really slow, and you want to be done and go on vacation or whatever else. Just make sure you or somebody is paying attention to this on a regular basis, every other week or so, until you're sure everything's there. And the other one getting down is that they'll start sending you notices, okay? Just deal with them. Don't freak out. They might generate some automatic notices that you pay stuff. They might say you owe more money than you know you do. Just respond to them. just request a refund. We just had a client yesterday that we had a sales tax issue, and we redid the data, and they got $7,000 back. Okay, so they paid in a lot of sales tax. So, but just follow through and be diligent. If you are going to take off for a month after selling your business or more, you're going to go on walkabout. Make sure somebody's checking your mail and dealing with those things while you're gone. Okay. So, I don't think I have it on here. You want to make sure that if you're changing the business address, I just thought of that, but we've been dealing with this a bunch. Make sure you know what that new business address is for these sites. So if for some reason you've sold your warehouse and that was where all your business email went, or business physical mail goes to, one, make a deal with the person you sold it to scan your email and get it to you until it all changes. But make sure you specifically change the address to where you want it to go. And I would say a PO box, if it's being checked weekly at least, that's fine. But if it's not going to be, I would pay for one of the services where all the mail goes to them and they scan it. Now they'll charge you per piece of mail and all that other stuff. But keep in mind, some of these notices can come with pretty heavy penalties if you don't respond to them.
That's fantastic. And a lot of the final checkdown list here on the spreadsheet that we have, I mean, I'm seeing here post sale plus 2 weeks, post sale plus 2 weeks, plus 4 weeks. And it boils down to checking, following up, documenting and keeping the documents, and then following up again. It seems like it's just the cyclical thing. Make sure that you follow up over and over and over again and get those confirmations in writing and keep them and document them.
Yeah, correct. So, and that's the piece. But yeah, definitely be aware of what email address that things are going to, what physical address things are going to. If anybody heard this story, there's a street in San Francisco area with multi-million-dollar mansions, and all of the street, all the taxes were never paid for like a decade or more. And what happened was somebody was able to go in and buy that street for $50,000. And basically they're going to be able to charge tolls to all the millionaires that live on the street. And they got it for and it's just like a really high end street. And everybody's upset that the notices have been going out, but the notices for the tax of like $50 a year, like nothing amount of money had been going to the wrong address for over a decade. And then it was listed, somebody saw it, they took the opportunity and they bought it. And then everybody went, oh my God. And all the public notices happened. Everybody missed it until it was actually purchased. So just be very careful to make sure those things, that you've sold your business, you've made a profit, and that you don't lose any of it to just bureaucracy.
Awesome. Well, I think for the final post where we're going to host this podcast and the video and the audio, we're going to have lots of links. We're going to have downloadable resources, and it's going to be a work in progress. So if you go and it seems a little bit thin at first, and we want to get this out to people as soon as possible, check back and we'll do our best to update people. We're over time right now. We're not up against the time. We're over time. But is there anything else, any final thing that you can think of that people should be aware of as they're thinking about the process of closing down a business?
Really, it's make your decisions, decide what you're going to do with things, and then decide to, and then just don't let up. That, you might think that, yay, day 2, we're going to take a vacation and I'm leaving, the very next day for 3 weeks on vacation. You really don't want to come back to a mess. Now, you can contract your CPA or a virtual assistant or somebody else to take care of this. You've just made a bunch of money and you don't want to deal with these details. But I would say make sure you double check everything. You as the owner are the one that's legally responsible. They're the ones that can audit you. So don't forget about it. You can delegate it, but make sure you double check that everything's been done when you get back from that vacation, or on a regular basis. Just set a reminder to get off the beach and do whatever, but just don't let it go. Some of these things and some of these fines, and just the stress of having to deal with the IRS or a state or whatever else, and the cost and hiring someone is such a pain, and you can just be proactive about it to minimize it as much as possible. So that'd be the last piece of advice I have.
Absolutely. I think that's good advice. I think that's a good spot to end at. Scott, where can people learn more about you?
You can find us at catchingclouds.net, or they can email info@catchingclouds.net. We have a bunch of blogs and information around our services. And if you're a larger seller that really wants accurate financials, you can reach out to us. We'll take over and be your outsourced accounting department, and we speak e-commerce.
Yeah, and they have the new training academy as well. I would recommend taking a look at that, signing up, doing that. It won't take a long time for you to get familiar with it. So thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for agreeing to this, and let's get this out there for people.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
All right.